On this episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show, I am joined by my good friend Russ Payne from Houston, Texas. We're going to talk about biofeedback and restoring volitional muscle contraction.
The Ask Mike Reinold Show. Helping people feel better, move better, and perform better. Before we get to the podcast, I wanted to make sure you knew about my free online course on the Introduction to Performance Therapy and Training. If you want to learn how to get started optimizing and enhancing performance, this is the course for you. Head to mikereinold.com/performance to sign up today.
Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show. I am here today. We're going to flip the script again, and we've been doing this a bunch lately with obviously the COVID pandemic going on and us staying at home. Instead of us all being a champion answering your questions with my team there, what I've actually gotten to do is to team up with some of my friends and colleagues around the nation and ask them some questions. So instead of you guys listening to my garbage all the time and all my stupid answers, it's time for me to ask some questions to some of the smart people that I know too. So today, we have a very special guest, my good friend Russ Payne from Houston, Texas. Russ is the Director of Sports Medicine at UT Physicians Sports Medicine Group. I don't know if I said that well, but I mean, you guys probably heard me talk about Russ in a lot of my presentations because a lot of the things that I've learned and I've done on the scapula and heck, lots of things on the knee and neuromuscular control rehabilitation, all these things I've learned from Russ and people all the time. But Russ to me is one of those groups of like godfathers of sports, like physical therapy that have been very influential to me. So if it wasn't for the pandemic, I feel like we wouldn't be doing these things, right, Russ? But it's great to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it was awesome. So a few years ago now, it's been what, how many years since the M Trigger came out?
I think we hit the market like 2 years ago. We've been developing it for 5 years. So it's been on the market for a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, nice. So Russ has teamed up with another friend of ours, Brian Pryor, that has done some good work with the Light Cure laser and stuff like that. But they've teamed up together to come up with a new biofeedback unit called the M Trigger. And if you've followed me for some time, I've been talking about this now for years with Russ and been kind of trying to help get the word out, because what a lot of people don't know is that people like Russ and I and a lot of our friends, we use biofeedback a ton, even though it's not readily available on the market. But we love biofeedback for post-op patients, even some of our injured people that didn't have surgery. But Russ, why don't we start with that? Tell us a little bit about biofeedback. Like, what happened to biofeedback, and why did this kind of fade away? Why is biofeedback not as common as it used to be?
Well, I'd kind of disagree with you a little bit that it never was a big thing,
Right.
It was overshadowed by muscle stem. So it didn't like come and fade away. It's just been gradually building over a period of time. And I was one of the few people that used it. I used a little handheld biofeedback because I just didn't feel like I was getting results with muscle stem. And I've had like 13 knee surgeries. So I've tried all the stuff to get your quad back. And when I put muscle stem on, I said, oh, that looks good, but I can't make my own muscle,
Right.
So I started using biofeedback, and I realized that my patients were getting better so much faster. And, I've seen all pro athletes, and I see, athletes that have had an ACL reconstruction in the NFL, and they're a year and a half post-op, and they come to me, and they've got an extensor lag. They can't even do a straight leg raise. And my patients don't have that problem because we address that in the beginning. Part of the reason is the devices were expensive too. I mean, they were $2,000 or $3,000 for a device, and it really wasn't that very user friendly. And the muscle stem market was so big. The reason the muscle stem market was so big is because it was a rental, reimbursable product that made millions and probably billions of dollars. So tons of money was issued to help support that as a rental product for research. There's only a few articles on biofeedback because biofeedback got cut loose as a code. The actual code is still there. But most people, the insurance companies don't reimburse because the psychology and psychiatric group abuse that code for relaxation and that type of thing. So insurance companies said, we're not paying for that.
That's
so
crazy.
Now we use the neuromuscular code when we use biofeedback. So instead we do therapeutic exercise, manual therapy, and then neuromuscular code is what we use for biofeedback. Right. So that makes sense. So there's really not a code for biofeedback that really works, even though there is a code. Most people don't reimburse for it. But I think this is a kind of since I've learned more about it, it's a new wave concept. It's kind of spreading through to understand the science behind why biofeedback works, maybe even better than muscle stim.
Right.
So when you have our device, which is very sophisticated, user-friendly, people can come in and download the app on their phone and get to work with it. They see the results. And people that are really in tune with their patients love this device. And it's up to your creativity what you can do with it. So it's all about starting and, to diminish the atrophy and inhibition that occurs day 2 post-op. I'll use the biofeedback for day 2 post-op up to 3 months post-op. Every time they come in, they get 10 minutes of quad setting. And our goal is to recruit more motor units. Right. And that's why my patients all do well. That's one reason.
Right. And we all know that people, especially the complicated procedures, the big pain and the swelling in the knees and other joints, we all know that they have a terrible time with volitional control. Right. So it's funny. You hear other people struggling, or, they say like, hey, contract that quad. You're like, yeah, no, I know I'm supposed to contract the quad. I can't. I haven't been trained to do that well. So, we've been big fans of biofeedback just along the way, because I think it's great that it works for volitional control, but a device like yours, like the M Trigger, it gives you feedback immediately of how much muscle contraction you're performing, right? It's biofeedback. That's the whole point of it. It's not just let's turn on a neuromuscular stim and crank it up as high as we can, but let's see how much you can press and you can contract. And we know through all the research that effort goes up when you have an immediate feedback and you see that and the outcomes comes back. So it's great for volitional control. For me, I think a lot of the new grads and students in physical therapy just haven't been exposed to it a little bit. So, we know there's neuromuscular stim. Why don't you tell people that maybe haven't worked with biofeedback much, what's the difference on the inside between biofeedback and neuromuscular electrical stim, that NMES? Like, what's happening to the body differently on these two?
Well, another point to make, just to finish with what your point was, that patients like to grade themselves too, right?
That's true.
They come in and they're like, oh my God, I can't even make this light go up hardly at all. I'm only at 300 microvolts. And then they come in the next week, they're at 1200 microvolts. So that's another motivational thing. So the difference, I think, between the two devices is kind of a scientific thing. And we've done I did a little lecture that Mike will share with you that goes into detail on this, but it's all about volitional contraction versus electrical muscle stim distally contracting. Right. So when you have a volitional contraction, you use your brain, and we now know that there's a decrease in cortical input in an ACL injured patient or anybody that has a swollen knee. So when you start with the cortex and go through the cortical pathways down to the femoral nerve, you're involving the entire system. So that's one thing that's different. When you put electrodes on your muscle, it's a distal brain, right? It's on your quad. So that's why you can't put muscle stim on and wake up with a big muscle or big abs or whatever. Right. And so the other thing it does is when you put electrical muscle stim on, it stimulates the largest diameter axons, okay? So, Mike, what is got the largest diameter axon, the fast twitch or the slow twitch?
It's type 2, right?
Right.
Right, yes.
Type 2 muscle fiber. Good job.
That was pretty good. I was like, you got me nervous there, but type 2s do.
Type 2, okay. So what is the most inhibited muscle fiber type? It's type 1. or the
Right.
slow twitch muscle fiber types are the ones that are inhibited the most, and that's been proven several times. So if you just stimulate the fast twitch and don't get to the slow twitch, you never really start with this volitional order of recruitment. And when you make a volitional contraction, the first muscle fiber type that fires is the slow twitch. So an isometric contraction starts with slow twitch. And if you're bench pressing, or doing a big squat, you bring in the fast twitch. But that's a good thing to do because it develops muscle fiber size. But if you don't start with the proper order of recruitment between slow twitch to medium fast twitch to high end fast twitch, then you never establish that hierarchy and you never really reverse the inhibition.
Right.
So over a period of time, patients start to get a volitional contraction. But have you ever tried to have a volitional contraction with the muscle stem? It's hard.
Right.
It's hard to do. And that's what we tell our people to do. I want you to work with the muscle stem, but they're like, well, I think I'm doing it, but I'm not really sure. But when you use biofeedback, you get immediate feedback and you start this order of recruitment to go from slow twitch, building up, really strong contraction, eventually to fast twitch. So that's the science behind it.
Now, what do you do with somebody that is super acute? So they're just days within surgery and they have zero volitional contraction. Do you ever use some NMES for a little bit to help them get over that hump, or do you still go right into biofeedback?
It's not because I'm prejudiced, it's because it works. Okay. So, I haven't put a muscle stem on a patient probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years. So
That's
what
awesome.
I will do in that case is, we're having them with their knee in full extension, the quadriceps in the shortened position, and they can't make a muscle. It's hard to do, right? If you've got a swollen, painful knee. Maybe they can do a leg raise. When you do a leg raise, the EMG goes way up. So I sit them over the edge of the table because they typically don't have any range of motion restrictions. And in the video you'll see in my presentation, we set a 2-day post-op patient that couldn't do a leg raise, couldn't do a quad set over the edge of the table. And we had one of the top Texans quarterbacks that you know of that was having difficulty after his ACL. And I said, Dr. Lowe said, man, we're having difficulty. Well, shoot this. Sit him over the edge and have him do an active knee extension. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
I sit them over the edge, and if they can bend to, 70 degrees or so, the peak EMG activity of your quad during an active knee extension is, between 90 and 30 degrees. On an active knee extension, is out near full extension, but it's at 30 degrees. So we do 90 to 40, and they can fire their muscle in that position.
That makes
another
sense.
Another trick you can do is have them in the gravity eliminated position. So just bring their knee up in full extension to a 90-degree position, just like we do with a rotator cuff repair. Have them in gravity eliminate them, try to hold their limb in that position, and have them try to pick their heel up off your hand.
That's
another tool. But the easiest thing to do is sit them over the edge of the table. You're not going to blow the graft out.
No, they can't even control the quad.
With no resistance, and you're not even getting their full extension. Now, if you had them do, a 50-pound knee extension machine, maybe. But with this, that's why people don't do it, because you got so ingrained to orthopedic surgeons' brain that knee extensions are bad for ACLs, but it's not a problem in the acute stage.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. So obvious implications for the knee, right? Like, especially ACL, like we're having patients that have quad strength deficits for months down the road. Who knows if we had just layered this on earlier to get volitional control earlier, would strength and conditioning at the 2, 3, 4, 5 month mark been much more effective, right? It's mind blowing to think what we may have missed, right?
It's a variable that we have not looked at in the past. Now, there are the EMG devices that were, $5,000 to $8,000 where you could do a true EMG test, but there's never been anything that's quick and dirty that you can look at the neuromuscular deficit.
Right.
And that's what we're doing right now. And our goal is to compare our strength deficits that we see when we test them at 6 months post-op in our follow-up program, and compare those strength deficits to the EMG deficits.
Right.
In my patient population, typically around 2 to 3 months, we've gotten rid of the neuromuscular deficit. But
That's
as
great.
I said before, you know, people jump the gun and they don't restore strength, and they jump into functional movements and functional exercise, and these swells, they have no eccentric control, they can't decelerate, and I'm putting them on the biofeedback, and they're freaking 50% deficit in their neuromuscular control.
Right.
That's a variable that I think, you know, I think it's a wave. This is a wave of sort of a mentality that I think people will adopt once they see it and once we publish things, that this is one variable that we need to take off the shelf.
Right. And, you know, and it makes sense too, because we, you know, if you look at how a quad functions, if you can barely do a quad set and a straight leg raise, and then you immediately jump into the gym and start doing some exercise just because it's week X, then you've missed the boat. But that's the really neat thing about biofeedback in general, though, is it's not just an exercise tool, but you can quantify. You can quantify the contraction. You can compare side to side. You can look for a neuromuscular deficit. So this isn't just a tool to rehab with. This is a tool to almost use as part of your evaluation process too, right?
Right. And we spent a little extra money to put in that neuromuscular deficit test because I thought it was important. And to do a 2-channel biofeedback instead of 1 channel, so we could do that comparison. So the other thing we're doing in the next year is we're partnering with a company called Blue Jay, and they do home networking with patients that's HIPAA compliant. So eventually the patient will be able to download the app on their phone, and they'll have a folder of their EMG data that we can share, and we can pull it up and look at it together. The physician can see that. And this is one thing that if you guys have an M trigger out there that are listening to this, I put these numbers down in my notes objectively. Right. So instead of saying, you know, quad's a little bit better muscle tone, they started at 700 microvolts. Now they're at 1200 microvolts EMG. So this is a objective criteria that allows us to document a patient's progress. And the patients love it. I mean, they like to see the numbers, you know, that they're getting better.
Yeah, no, that's really neat. And we've talked a lot about like using it on a muscle group to get a muscle group's volitional control back and to get it stronger down the road. Another neat thing that I do with biofeedback, I wanted to throw at you and then see if you have any other creative things, but the fact that it's 2-channel, I like to do certain exercises with 2 different muscle groups on 2 different channels. So I'm making it up off the top of my head, but maybe say like, you know, like a hip extension, and we have some of the pads on the low back and some on the glute. And I say like, look, I want you to do this bird dog for a hip extension. I want to see glutes and less back. I want to make sure that we're doing it right, or the right core is firing, or heck, even upper trap to lower trap ratios. What other neat ways do you use it? Because I'm sure you're even more creative than I am.
Well, that's for sure.
No. Good answer. That was good.
No, you're Mr. Creativity. So I'll learn a lot from you. One thing that's really helpful is to use it with prone planks for teaching people to do a lumbar stabilization program. So you want to fire your abdominals and your erector spinae together to brace, right? With that. And so you teach people neutral spine positioning, you teach them to brace, but they don't really know whether they're firing or not. But with the M trigger, you use 2 channels, you can see exactly what's going on. And you say, well, you're not really firing your abs. Well, I think I am, but I said, you need to get that. Oh, your erector spinae is going down. So you can use it for that. That's a really good, I don't see that many spine patients. I see a few, but the spine therapists are crazy with it. Now, strength and conditioning is a whole nother ball game. And it's a really good tool for performance individuals that are, you know, strength coaches and also personal trainers. It's a great tool for them. With regard to the shoulder, posterior cuff and lower trap are 2 great kind of sister muscles that work together with different activities. And I've got a bunch of videos that I think you've seen so that we can fire the posterior cuff and at the same time try to get posterior tilting of the scapula. And Phil Page has used it for limiting upper trap activity along with lower trap. So some people believe that the upper trap maybe kind of like an antagonist to what you're trying to achieve. So you can use one channel for inhibition, the other channel for contraction. Now, another thing we've been doing recently, well, if you have a bilateral knee patient, you can use two channels, and the patient can do both of those knees simultaneously. During the rest period of one, do the other one. You know me, I'm brutal. So the other thing you can do is you can do quadriceps and hamstring contractions, but I don't do a co-contraction. I do 15 or 10 seconds of quad, and when the quad relaxes, do a hamstring isometric. We never do hamstring isometrics, but hamstrings are a really important muscle group. We kind of forget about that. But it's really up to your creativity. That's the beauty of this device, is you can, think of things to do. And the other fun thing to do is like put it on the serratus anterior and try to prove some of these research articles that you've seen that, this does the climbing of the wall with your elbows against the wall. What do you call that? I can't remember. Does that increase your serratus activity? And sure enough, it does.
Right.
What about the dynamic hug? Which one's a better exercise? What about rowing, or what about, manual resisted external rotation? So you can prove it to yourself. So it's a fun tool.
Right. And everybody's different, right? When we look at those studies, we look at like a mean of a group of subjects, right? You may find that one exercise is better than another for a certain person, right? So, the more individualized, the better. So awesome. So this is my favorite kind of episode right here, because one, I don't have to talk the whole time. It's fantastic to actually ask smarter people questions. But Russ is the man on biofeedback, and this M-Trigger device is really amazing and ridiculously affordable. There's no reason why everybody shouldn't be using this. I just think people don't know about it. So hopefully we can get some awareness to this, because it's something that some of the best sport physical therapists I know are using. So the best are using it. I think it's something everybody should use it. So, we learned about the science behind it. We learned about why it's better than neuromuscular stim and some creative ways to use it for a bunch of different things. Thank you, Russ. I appreciate you taking, the time out of your schedule and the freaking pandemic that we're having to do this. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you have any more questions like this, even though I asked all the questions, but if you have questions too, you know what to do. Go to MikeReinold.com, click on that podcast link, and you can fill out the form to ask us questions. Be sure to rate and review this on iTunes and Spotify, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks so much.